Hi, everybody. We have something very special for you today. We have the Purpose Power Index, which we are going to launch for the first time here in the world. The next slide. So everyone in this room hopefully believes that it's in the interest of business and companies to drive positive change in the world. And the Harvard Business School academics have said that companies benefit from generating value by doing so. There has been a lot of buzz around the word purpose. Recently, the 181 CEOs of the United States came out and said that purpose over profits matter. Milton Friedman had it wrong. Stakeholders were not the only ones we should be thinking about. So we thought it would be valuable if we created a study to measure how consumers understand brand purpose.
Thank you. So StrawberryFrog and Reputation Institute came together to do this study, the first of its kind ever to quantify purpose. We all know the ethereal quality and the logical, intuitive definition of purpose, but it's about being bigger than profits. It's impacting society positively. And so we wanted to see if we could come up with a measurement of it. I'm the CEO of a company that does data and insights, and so we put our statisticians on this task, and we're really excited about the findings. We went to 5,700 informed general public. What that means is consumers, and we captured 17,500 ratings. So it was very rigorous in the analysis. So the drivers of purpose that we found through this study are resonance, clarity, motivation, and differentiation. So for a company to get a very strong rating on its overall purpose, it needs to be different than everyone else. 28.5% of the purpose success, as in the success of your purpose being adopted by the world, is related to the differentiation. The least important of these, although still important at almost 20%, is clarity. All of these things must happen at once for you to be successful in telling the world what you stand for. So these are the big reveal of the top 20 most purposeful brands as determined by our 5,700 folks in the study. As you can see there, it's very, very interesting because we have the disruptors. There's some brands there that you might expect, although so interesting that cleaning products take position 1 and 3. This is a comment about where we are in the world, that you have to be both sustainable in the way that you develop and produce, and you have to speak in a very human voice to the people that you're trying to reach. You'll also see some brands that have long legacies there, like Kellogg's and UPS. We think this is really unique, bringing these two types of companies together to find the top 20 most purposeful brands in the world. You're seeing it for the first time here today, so thank you for joining us.
What we found, a really interesting insight in this research, was that the brands that were at the top of the list managed to be relevant to both the right side and the left side, or let's say the Democrats and the Republican consumers across the United States. So brands, the top Republican brands were Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, which stood for religious freedom. The top Democrat brands were REI and Tom's Shoes and Seventh Generation. A brand such as Patagonia came very high on the list, and just, I think, missed it by a fraction, but they ranked mostly on the Democratic side. The bad news is when it comes to purpose, brands have a long way to go. Only 27.4% of the consumers agree that a brand has a clear purpose. So they don't even know that this purpose exists, what we've been talking about today.
The good news, though, is that we know what leaders need to do to both do and say around their purpose. They need to do things differently. You can't say your way out of having no purpose, and you can't just have a purpose without expressing it in the world in a way that will be embraced. And so, most importantly, leaders of the companies that are very high on the purpose ranking that we've revealed today, they operate responsibly. We know, again, what this means intuitively, but they sell products and services that positively contribute to society. They don't have to be in a category that is doing something that is good for the world, but the way they do it and the way they express themselves needs to speak to the people who are going to interact with their brand. They seek to make products and services sustainably and support the welfare of the communities that they interact in.
And number two, they communicate authentically. For example, the Patagonia ad behind me, "Don't buy this jacket." And thirdly, most importantly, they boldly activate their purpose. So many of you know the REI opt-out, where they inspired both their employees and the consumers to avoid Black Friday and go out and enjoy the outdoors. Hobby Lobby, as I mentioned, supports religious freedoms very powerfully. And SunTrust, a financial institution on our list, started a movement to combat financial stress. And that is the Purpose Power Index. Yeah.
Please welcome Atlantic staff writer Emma Green.
So I was just listening from backstage, and I think the research you all have done is so fascinating. And one of the things that shocked me when I heard is that actually some of the best well-defined brands in the United States, consumers don't actually think of them as purpose-driven. This is Netflix, this is Apple. So if companies like that don't have this association with being purpose-driven, what does it mean to be purpose-driven?
Yeah, so we talked about being bigger than profits, and that's super important to it. The purpose is really the why you exist. And you make a very good point that some of the companies that we most admire and might have high stock price valuations, et cetera, have great products and services, but increasingly people are looking to connect in a different way with brands. And Scott is in a business of creating movements. He can speak more to that, but it's really important to make that connection and have a set of ideals that people can live up to. One of the brands, Method, on the list there, I think is interesting because if you go to their site and you're a consumer and you're trying to think about brands that you love, you can feel it. It oozes that they have purpose. Their story is about people doing things driven by a belief system, even though they're creating products, cleaning products. We wouldn't have thought that as maybe the top of the list. And then companies like USAA, who were number 7 on the list, financial services company, they really know who they're serving and connect very deeply with the veterans and those that they serve. So they do very well as well.
I think that a lot of the issues around the thing you mentioned is that most of these purpose strategies sit in some PowerPoint somewhere, or maybe they're framed on the CEO's wall. None of the employees truly understand what it represents. They don't experience it firsthand. The community doesn't understand it. And you never really see it in any of the communications, and definitely not in the product or service experience. So there is a purpose strategy, but it's just not been activated.
One of the groups that gets talk of purpose so often is millennials, young people. This idea that companies can't just get millennials to buy their goods or services based on a good product. They actually have to have a purpose that they're selling as well. But that didn't necessarily line up with your research. Tell us about what you found about generations there.
Certainly. So generational divides can have all kinds of interesting impacts on studies, but actually the most interesting thing in this study is that it has to be way more than just about the way that you interact with the brand from a purchasing perspective. What we're capturing here is the likelihood that people will work for, support, say something positive about, and in fact the biggest net benefit to companies that have a good purpose is not about whether millennials or someone else will buy their products, it's whether they'll be welcomed into a neighborhood. So you imagine you're in a growth company and you need to expand by growing into new areas, setting up factories or whatever it is you need to do, you're going to have rebellion if you don't have a great purpose versus motivation and love. If you have a really good purpose, you'll get better talent, people will buy your products, and people will invest in you and let you in their neighborhood. So there's all these different things that are more than just a demographic cut, but it's about how people interact with brands now.
I mean, the amazing study that Kylie and Stephen and Chip have worked on revealed some myths about purpose. And the myths are around, a specific segment of the population. What's interesting here is all segments of the population have responded with an understanding of the purpose. So not just millennials, it's all different generation A, B, C to Z.
Got it. So everybody wants.
Everyone is interested, yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, as you talked about in your opening remarks, this sense of purpose can come with a little bit of caution or a little bit of challenge, perhaps, especially when it comes to those associations with politics.
Yeah.
Dick's Sporting Goods, for example, is one of the companies that you looked at. And as you all might be familiar, they have recently taken action on some of the firearms stock in their stores, trying to put limitations on that stock. And I wonder, how does that affect people's perception of the purpose of a company like Dick's Sporting Goods?
Sure. So there's always short, medium, and long-term ramifications of taking a stand. But our advice in general is at least take a stand. Diligence it really carefully before you take it, but it does pay off in the long run in terms of having a strong purpose. One of the companies that we rated very highly based on the analytical study that we did was Chick-fil-A. I was fascinated today to pick up the Wall Street Journal and read the little column down the left, the one that has the highlights for the day. This is the Wall Street Journal, keep in mind, business reader audience. And the fact that Chick-fil-A has changed their philanthropic giving policies was in that little column. And I thought, what a sign of the times when something about a philanthropic spending makes it into that column. And the point was that they've taken feedback, they've got a strong stance, they're closed on Sundays, they have deep roots to certain values in their company, and you may or may not agree with those values, but they're really sticking to it, and it's serving them well. People believe them.
Can there ever be negative consequences to taking a
Yes.
stand like that? So talk about that a little bit.
You can alienate people, but again, you've got to know what business you're in, who you care about the most, and what your employees care about the most, and speak to them in the ways that they will embrace. Forgive me, Scott.
What would you add?
I would say that I agree 100% with what Kylie said. I think there are brands out there that are super passionate of what they do. They are passionate about their purpose, and they don't want to be everything to everyone. So in that respect, that's kudos to them. Other brands appeal on a wider scale because they have had for many years invested in what they consider to be a purpose. Like Microsoft ranks very highly in this list. The aura of the Gates Foundation is not far from their brand. And so, in that respect, they are applicable across the board.
So I just want to remind the audience at this point that we will be taking a few questions at the end with Slido, which you should be familiar with. So go ahead and put those in if you'd like, and we'll take a couple of those questions at the very end of our conversation. I want to think through what it means to have purpose, not just to one segment of potential consumers or employees, but to a broad swath of potential consumers. So how do you guide companies to think about purpose, or how would you advise them to think about purpose across income, age, gender, geography, all of these typical dividing lines in the United States?
I mean, I would say there are a couple of things to watch out for. Don't do purpose washing, which is, a lot of companies have these very generic purpose strategies, either very low down or so high and unremoved from what they do that it doesn't make any sense. I think try to find an idea on the rise in culture that's happening out there that you feel is right for you and lean in on that. I mean, I thought the Talbot and Dress for Success example this morning was a wonderful example of a really wonderful, good that people could do, and it was directly related to their business. So that, to me, would be a first starting point. But also, think long term. Don't think about just a tactic, one action. Think of it as a philosophy that is going to guide the organization over many, many years and inspire the employees, all the different stakeholders.
Kylie, would you have anything to add if you're advising a company on trying to have that broad appeal?
Yeah, so I would always say, why are you trying to have the broad appeal? Because that's what we're talking about here is purpose. Is it because you can make more impact on the world? If so, I understand. Then let's diagnose what levers you need to pull. If you're just trying to have broad appeal to sell more things to people, I would again say why. We all understand the imperative for growth. But I would start there. I'm not sure that every company should be trying to have broad appeal. And in fact, one of the things that we're talking about with like taking a stand is sometimes you're going to alienate groups. But if you've chosen to specify the people who matter the most to you in terms of your stakeholders, those who will support you, those employees that you'll have in the future, and the people who've really loyal to your brand, then take a stand and own it.
That's a great point, not trying to be everything to everyone. So, purpose is one of these words that I think has picked up cachet in the business world, especially in recent years, this idea that this is a way you might want to be perceived. And I wonder what you see as the next phase of companies thinking through this aspect of their mission and identity. What are the things that you hear from the best leaders in business as they're thinking through what this means for their company?
I mean, I think if you follow sort of what purpose could become, if you think of it as, let's say, a societal movement, that an organization is igniting a movement that their employees embody, that the products embody, that they stand for, then the next thing it could represent is a new leadership tool for organizational leadership. But if you go even one step further, then why couldn't you even think about movement ownership? So moving from buying an equity stake in a company to aligning your values with an equity based on a movement. You're buying into a movement that you fundamentally believe is doing right by you and your values.
Kylie, what do you see is coming next?
It's a good question. I spend my time with CEOs and communicators and CMOs talking about the things that drive their business forward and help them build trust with their clients and stakeholders. The big frontier I see is boards starting to demand to understand where the risks and opportunities are in the way that the company is operating, with purpose being at the center of it. It will be in chairman's letters. There will be like way more granular definitions of what they're going to do about that purpose. We just went through the exercise ourselves of defining our own purpose, and it is a really difficult exercise to get everyone aligned behind it, and I believe boards will be the ones to instigate that.
Working through. So we have a couple of audience questions. The first, mentioning Chick-fil-A. So this is a story that's been in the news just this week about Chick-fil-A changing its philanthropic donations. And the question is, you mentioned that Chick-fil-A is no longer donating to anti-gay groups, but you found that their anti-gay stance was purposeful. Why do you think they changed? And I just add, for those who aren't familiar with the story, Chick-fil-A has, through its philanthropic branch, donated to organizations, some of which don't have LGBT identity as a center of their mission, but may hold that same-sex marriage is wrong or does not cohere with their religious beliefs. So that's just a little bit of background. So I'll turn it over to you. Why do you think Chick-fil-A changed direction?
I won't speculate too far because we're a data company, and so what I hope they did, I hope they went out and went to the people who invest in them, the people who work for them, the communities that they're in, and found out what mattered to them. My suspicion is that as they expand into new geographies, views change, and they found that they cross different lines, and found that if they wanted to maintain a strong position in being able to attract the talent and be welcomed into the neighborhood, they looked at the data and they decided that maybe they wanted to just refine their policies a little bit. So it sounds like a wise decision to me if they used it in a data-driven way, and my suspicion is it was prompted by geographic move or something else.
So another question similarly along these lines, if a company's newly declared purpose creates an enormous backlash, should the company adjust that purpose, or does that make it seem inauthentic? What do you all think?
I mean, I think the company has to do what they believe is right for them, but I would also say they need to listen to their stakeholders. So if the leadership is sitting on the top of the company and they do something that is creating a backlash among people working in the organization, the community, or millions of people, it's probably a good time to call Kylie and get a little more data.
Thank
on
you,
that.
Scott.
Of course.
That's very nice of you.
Yeah.
That was a good plug. Final question, and this is a great note to end on. What's the biggest surprise that you all found in your research?
So first of all, just the list of companies was really interesting. We talked a lot about companies like UPS, but also Honeywell. I was flabbergasted by the familiarity levels being high enough with Honeywell because they make wonderful products, but it's not a household name. So I loved that they were existing right beside names that we would expect there, like Tom's and Warby Parker. And we can all say what Tom's and Warby Parker do if you've interacted with those brands. But I went to investigate a little further with Honeywell, and I was just delighted by what I saw. Their story now is all about the future and sustainability.
So that shows how broadly this conversation can reach across the business world. Thank you so much, Kylie and Scott. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.